Last week, Lazy Peon did a really great video called If I Was in Charge of World of Warcraft. It was a brilliant video, and at the end he encouraged people to do their own, so I'm going to take him up on that offer. Now, there's probably other stuff that I would do beyond what's in this video, but these are kind of the main points, and stuff's purposefully general and not really is meant to just transplant right into Warlords of Draenor as it is now. So with all that said, let's go. First of all, world content. If I was in charge, well, world content would be a bit more important. Rares and treasures would matter more at max level. That means you get more toys, some utility items, and then some transmog related stuff for just doing your world exploration content. Hell, even having, say, an explorer's transmog set, I think would be really cool for something like this. Now, at max level, the rares would be a bit different. Instead of being these easy to kill, fixed spawn things, I'd make them roam a bit, I'd make them more dynamic, have more abilities, and more importantly, be way harder than they currently are. And beyond that, from time to time, super hard ones would spawn, with a zone or continent-wide alert going out to mark the spawn to let people know that stuff's going on. They'd drop currency, a chance of a mount from a decently large pool of possible mounts, rep tokens, crafting mats, various things like that, and potentially a BOE world epic. I love the idea of dropping one of those BOE epics rather than a regular one because it gives everyone a reason to care about that rare mob, not just people who are trying to gear up, and that means that Blizzard can tune the difficulty to be properly hard so that it challenges everyone. Basically, these are kind of random, zone-wide Zandalari Warbringers that are way harder. It's taking that idea and running with it a little bit more. And more importantly, if you stand in the fire, you die. If you stand in front of the slashy thing, you die. Proper difficulty that actually matters out in the world. It's what this game is currently lacking. Now, this system could be surrounded by a bounty system that I'd say would probably take some sort of inspiration from Diablo 3, Reaper of Souls, so kind of just telling you to go out in the world and, you know, get some bounties. I think that could be kind of cool. Now, in addition to all that, I would ensure that there are fully fledged reputations in the game, less of this current grindy bollocks because I don't think it's fun. I think the formula of having daily quests and then story quests every once in a while is a pretty good one, provided the rewards are sane and they don't do what they did with Miss Pandaria's patch 5.0. But they could definitely do stuff to spice it up. In addition to the regular reps, I would have some of them be centered around world events. Imagine something similar to the content of patch 5.3, but on steroids, more event types, more bosses, and more importantly, a more dynamic nature. For an example, after X number of events, maybe a world boss would spawn and you could kill that, and perhaps sometime after a boss is killed, maybe the enemy could counterattack, which would send loads of their soldiers over to the hub for the reputation you're currently doing. I think stuff like that could make really a reputation feel like a war, and that would work great for something like the Shatari Defense. Also, in patch 6.2, they're bringing in bonus events which affect dungeons, battlegrounds, and things like that. Well, I would have them affect certain parts of the world. For an example, imagine Iron Horde invasion, or a Burning Legion invasion, or a Naga invasion, or whatever kind of invasion that really pleases you. It could land in a zone, last a few days, give you a whole bunch of, you know, world bosses, rare mobs, rare events, things happening within that zone. Hell, maybe it could even affect some of the hubs and things like that in the zone, or maybe even a city or something like that. I think they can really do a lot of stuff with the idea of an event system like that. Rewards for these would include vanity items, perhaps some transmog sets, currency, and then of course the world bosses may drop the odd bit of decent gear and things like that. And really, these systems that I've just outlined are just a start, but most of the needed functionality on the technical end is already in the game. It's just a matter of cobbling it together well. If I were in charge of the next expansion, I would at the very least have the stuff that I have covered so far in this video. Next, if I was in charge of World of Warcraft, I would do leveling a little bit different. I would try to strike a balance between Wrath of the Lich King and Warlords of Draenor. Mainly, new expansions would give you more choice in terms of zones. At the very least, your final zone and first zone would actually be one of two choices, so Borean Tundra or Howling Fjord, or perhaps Storm Peaks versus Icecrown. You'd have a bit of a choice there. That would be great for replaying, and also it would just give you overall a bigger world, and I think that would definitely be very nice. I would also add in group quests and various things like that, and more importantly, I would tune up the power of the enemies that you face, especially the more rare or tough ones, so that there is actually challenge when you are leveling, because right now in Warlords, there is zero challenge to leveling, and I think that's a great pity. If I were in charge of raids, I would actually do nothing to the raids themselves. I think they're brilliant and no real changes are that much needed. Gearing is something that I would change though. All of those silly Warlords additions that are designed for instant gratification, like the tertiary stats, the proc gem sockets, ugh. Remove them all, they're bad. Gem sockets would actually appear in gear though, mainly later on in a raid tier's progression. That would be a great way of signifying that the later on bosses have got slightly better gear than the absolutely silly system that they're planning with ramping up eye levels in patch 6.2. I would also likely remove Warforged altogether, or at the very least I would have Warforged be a separate progression path. That allows people to unlock Warforged tokens which upgrade gear by 6 item levels one time only. It would be best for them to drop from raids, as I don't really like the idea of them turning into the same thing as the Mists of Pandaria upgrade system. Perhaps there could even be a way of turning bits of useless gear from raids into a token instead of disenchanting it. That would pretty much mean that even if a bit of gear is of no interest to anyone, well, it can still help out the raid, and I think that would be great. Also, difficulty levels are a really hot topic. I think 4 is quite a lot. LFR was made because they removed the difficulty level that Icecrown Citadel 10 player basically represented. In Cataclysm, they merged the difficulty levels between 10 and 25 so that they were the same, meaning that difficulty level was gone, and that's why they made LFR, to sort of scratch that itch. Well, in Warlords of Draenor, normal raids completely fill that niche, so LFR is no longer needed. All it does now is poison the gear progression by being the fastest option to get up to raid level, and I think that's terrible because it's the most asinine, easy content that doesn't require anything from people. Due to all of this, I think LFR could fully be removed, or it could be turned into one of those bonus objective event thingies that's happening in patch 6.2. Having normal, heroic, and then mythic would be a good overall balance as far as I'm concerned, because mythic really is that extra level above everything else in terms of what it demands. To make up for the loss of LFR, dungeons would play a far more pivotal role in pre-raid gearing. Which rather conveniently leads us on to the topic of dungeons. If I were in charge of World of Warcraft, I would rebalance dungeons. Normal dungeons would be as hard as current day heroics, and heroics would be as hard as the new mythic dungeons that are coming out. Today's normal is so easy that it may as well not exist, so let's just remove it. This would pretty much mean that there is meaningful pre-raid gameplay that teaches people how to play the game, which is very much unlike the current system where it's just a few normal dungeons and you're right into LFR. I think that kinda sucks. I would also revamp the Proving Grounds to be a far better tool for teaching people. Now, if dungeons are going to play more of a role, then adding in more dungeons throughout an expansion is a very, very good move. Plus, at launch, expansions would have at least maybe 10 to 14 dungeons, like some of the better past ones, like Wrath. I think that 8 was just far too little for Warlords of Draenor. About halfway through an expansion, what you would do is unlock Mythic mode and then add in maybe 4 new dungeons, 3 new dungeons. Come on, they've got a larger team, they can definitely pull that together. The reason why you unlock Mythic and add the new dungeons at the same time is so that you can ensure that players aren't all funneled into the same dungeons, and of course that new Mythic would add a few new mechanics here and there. Next, if I were in charge of World of Warcraft, cities would be far more important. Each expansion would come with new cities for players to hang out in. We have not had a neutral expansion city since Dalaran, and I think the game really suffers from it. And speaking of suffering, if I was in charge of World of Warcraft, garrisons would be a different kettle of fish. Ideally, I would have them be just far, 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 far less important. All profession and utility buildings would be removed, and they'd be shifted to a neutral hub city, similar to Dalaran. I think that was a very good move back in Wrath, and it sucks that they've just been stuffed into the garrison in Warlords. The default place to hang out should be a city full of other players, not an instanced area where you're completely alone. That's bad. You're playing an MMO. Ugh, damn it, Blizz. Next, I would refocus the garrison to be far more based around cosmetics and things like that. It would be more optional, and it would have very little power. Instead, it would just be there mainly to be a representation of your progress. You can unlock cosmetic things as you do archaeology and things like that, as you do, your quests, your raids and things like that. It would, of course, do some more stuff. And even if it were to have far less functionality, it could still be used for things like garrison invasions, or perhaps the leveling process and storytelling of the expansion. Ultimately though, I would rather not have the garrisons at all, because I think those art resources could be better spent on dungeons, raids, and world content. Perhaps a more sustainable way to do this would be to give players a house, an airship, or maybe a boat, if, it would suit the expansion, because that would require a bit less in terms of massive buildings for Blizzard to create. They could just make some basic stuff, make loads of little tweaks and things like that, and then ship that off to players, while still having the bulk of the art resources go towards things like, I don't know, Bladespire and Karabor. Next, if I was in charge of World of Warcraft, well, I don't really know exactly what I'd do with PvP because I don't PvP that often, but I would like more arenas and battlegrounds, and I would also balance PvP and PvE separately so that, one balance doesn't screw up the other. Now, Lazy Peon actually had some great ideas when it came to PvP. I especially like the idea of having a chest spawn in one of the world's arenas that contained PvP gear, gold, or perhaps even a mount, and his other idea was great. It was about getting a conquest buff from killing the enemy's faction leader, so that gameplay would actually matter. And that's pretty much it. This video was mainly meant to be sort of short to medium term goals that could be implemented for maybe the next expansion, if I was in charge. The overall goal that I would have here is just to get people away from clicking on menus and doing things like that all the time, get them into the world, and then when they are clicking in menus to go into dungeons, I would like those dungeons to be more challenging. Overall, the pace of gearing would just be a little bit slower than it currently is, and there'd be no freebies, no handouts, no random bits of just gear tokens that are thrown at us. No, I would have it so that you earn your gear, but the game is designed so that you can reasonably be expected to earn your gear, climb that ladder, and be better. I think that roughly refocusing towards these things would give people a more gameplay-focused expansion than Warlords of Draenor, and certainly the recent sub-loss would indicate to us that that's what people seem to want. Anyway, that has been it for me. What I'd like to know, which is also what Lazy Peon wanted to know, is what do you think you would do if you were in charge of World of Warcraft? Also, be sure to check out Peon's video, it's brilliant, and also check out his YouTube channel. He's one of the biggest up-and-comers of the last year of World of Warcraft YouTubing, and I heartily recommend you go and check him out. Anyway, that's it for the video. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.